Pretty cool stuff, but I'm wondering where Volume 2 is.
Didn't expect to get an answer to that. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from M83, Digital Shades Volume 2. So, this kinda came out of nowhere. M83 is one of those bands that admittedly lie on the fringe of electronic music, but just fall within my reviewing boundaries. They certainly have an electronic background, with their early material like their self-titled, and Dead City's Red Seas and Lost Ghosts, even if later they started moving towards indie rock and synth pop with later projects like Before the Dawn Heals Us and Saturdays Equals Youth that got them more traction. Well, I say them, M83 is a band with more than one member, but it's pretty much helmed by one guy, Anthony Gonzalez, and featuring various other musicians along the way, but I digress. And yeah, ever since I went through their whole catalog for my review with their last album, Junk, in 2016, I've definitely become a fan. Junk itself I enjoyed way more than most people seem to. I thought it was a charming blend of late 70s and early 80s throwbacks that kept me coming back to it throughout that year. But unquestionably the M83 album that stuck with the most with me was their big commercial breakthrough in 2011, Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. In spite of being a bit of an 80s throwback and containing a lot of overblown indie rock cliches, M83 really took this style and made it their own, not to mention despite being a double album that lost a little bit of steam in its second disc, it kept my attention the whole way through. Even had this neat concept of having these brother and sister albums that are closely related. I thought that was really creative. Even ended up being an inspiration for me on one of my own albums, but whatever. I mean, yes, that one is barely electronic, but it certainly counts as electronic in my eyes, and has really grown to become a personal favorite. But there was one big loose end left over in the M83 back catalog. The fourth M83 album, Digital Shades Volume 1, came out in 2007, and it was basically a big Brian Eno tribute. Straight ambient electronic project, did definitely had the feel of a side project. It was pretty nice though. Given that album came out 12 years ago and before M83 really blew up, I was expecting that Volume 1 to be just left hanging in a one-off anomaly in their catalog. But here we are. The sequel has arrived at last. It's bizarrely abbreviated as DSVII though, which makes it look like something completely unrelated. And judging from the iTunes reviews I peeked at, yes, those are still a thing, it seems some fans were confused by this one. And by confused, I mean there was some pretty big backlash. People who jumped in during the Hurry Up era confused by the mere concept of ambient music, or in some cases just by an entirely instrumental album. This kind of blows my mind, honestly. Even if you were too lazy to go through their back catalog and realize a release like this isn't off-brand at all, how the hell did some of these people love Hurry Up, We're Dreaming and not like ambient music? Did they skip all the interludes or what? A lightweight is born every minute, I suppose. But whatever, I was excited to hear what Gonzalez had in store for this sequel, apparently inspired by 80s science fiction and fantasy films. The album cover was giving me a little bit of a, like, Dragon's Lair or He-Man vibes. Could be interesting. And he already delved into those kinds of vibes in some moments on Junk, like Moon Crystal or Tension or those. Figured I'd probably like this album, and yeah, I did like it. I basically got what I expected. I do think it needs cutting down. It got pretty samey, but it certainly all worked well for what it was going for. I almost certainly liked it more than the first volume as well. I mean, they're unsurprisingly not that different. The first was a bit more simplistic and a bit more shoegazy. This sounds higher budget, lusher, more soundtrack-ish, I guess. I'm told it's inspired by 80s video game soundtracks too. I can see that with a couple of these choices in synth tones, but the inclusion of real instruments make it sound more like the kind of stuff you'd hear in cheap anime from around that time. Like when I was in high school, I used to really like this one early 90s low-budget anime called The Irresponsible Captain Tyler that had a soundtrack that pretty heavily resembles the material on here in many moments, so, you know, still hit some nostalgia buttons. But yes, while the two volumes of Digital Shades are very similar sounding, I definitely preferred the more polished sound of this one. In general, I think I've tended to gravitate towards this band's more polished later work than their rougher and more shoegazy earlier stuff, but the original Digital Shades I remember getting a bit tedious, and the better sound clarity on this one made it easier to swallow, at least for me. But yeah, let's talk about individual tracks, shall we? There are a couple of big standouts here for sure. Like the opener, Hell Riders, is freaking great. Starts out with just one completely static single note pad, but as it goes on, it builds up into these layers of guitars and synths and choirs, and even the equivalent of a sax solo played on some NES sounding synth. It's pretty dang epic, I gotta say. Probably the best track in the bunch, if I'm being honest. From there, most of the other tracks have very similar ingredients and kinda work towards the same vibe. They're all still enjoyable, but they can run together a bit. Like, A Bit of Sweetness has a similar blend of guitars and synths and choirs to the opener, but unlike the slow burn epic feel of that one, it goes for a more heavenly vibe and more laid back and emotional and dramatic, like soundtrack piece. And most tracks on here kinda sound like that. Like, the tracks like Meet the Friends, A Taste of the Dusk, Typhon Glory, and Oh Yes, You're There Every Day, they don't do much to stand out and end up pretty forgettable. All of them are at least enjoyable while they're on, but still you could have cut a couple of these. But there are other tracks that have some instrumental textures that stand out a bit more, like the Tangerine Dream style synth arpeggios of Goodbye Captain Lee, or the straight ambient pads of Colonies, or the washes of synth imitation orchestral strings on the track Mirage. Sorry, Porter Robinson has ruined those words. But yeah, that track was pretty great. Or the humming and wordless vocalizing on A Word of Wisdom. That one reminds me a lot of For the Kids from their last album, if not nearly as substantive. I mean, that one's not even 2 minutes long. There's a lot of great piano-driven tracks too, like Jeux d'Enfance. I'm not French. But that track, despite being solo piano, was pretty awesome and an emotional high point on this thing. And Lunar Sun, as well, was an excellent little piano and flute duet with a very dreamy and ethereal intro. I'll also say that the singles from this album were all pretty good too. Like, I will say I wanted to like the lead single and closer, Temple of Sorrow, more than I think I actually did. And I probably would have liked it more if I had heard it when it came out, before the album dropped. But in the context of the album, it doesn't do enough to make it stand out from the crowd. It takes a bit too long to get going in a way that catches my interest. It'd likely be more of a standout if there were fewer tracks on here that sounded kind of similar to it. I still like that one though. It's certainly fitting as a closer, and there are some sections of that track later on that remind me a little of Pink Floyd's Echoes, which is nice. I don't think you could cut this one out altogether. But the other singles were better. Feelings is a nice little heartfelt synth ditty with plenty of layers and some excellent melodies and chord progressions, and a change up into some more intense hurry-up or dreaming kind of vibes in its second half. That track does a great job of sounding really big and expansive. And Lune de Fiel is probably the single most energetic moment on here. Has a lot of fun and often epic synth progressions, but what I especially like about this one is the drumming and bass line, which makes it sound like M83 were doing a collab with Air. You remind me of Air, you automatically get points. So yeah, on the whole, this album may not exactly be mind-blowing, but I enjoyed it a lot all the way through. Even the worst moments on here are really only low points for being redundant or forgettable, and outdone by other moments on here than they are for being unenjoyable in their own right. And this album definitely had more good moments than bad moments. Just need to be edited down a little bit, that's all. And even then, the meh moments aren't such dead weight that they pull down my enjoyment of the good moments. The overall aesthetic that Gonzalez was aiming for here was definitely executed well and pulled me in. There's a lot of great chord progressions and melodies all over the place too. For what this album is going for, I think it's pulled off very well. It's a really good album that had the potential to be great. Only time will tell how much I get out of it replay value-wise, but I'll hang on to this one. I can give my thumbs up to this. I think I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.